George Soros made his fortune by asking the right questions. His strategic mindset uncovered his opponent's weaknesses, and he exploited them ruthlessly to create outsized impacts in his favor. Now he's taken the skills he used to make his fortune and converted them into a formidable political weapon. What is a vulnerability he discovered? And why has he chosen to focus his energies on backing the campaigns of prosecutors? How can he wield the weapon he's found? And how much damage can he do?
After we say a few words about what motivates George Soros, we're going to show you the 3 questions he's asking. What is it about American criminal law that makes it a vulnerability that he believes he can exploit? How was he able to exploit the vulnerability he found to get power? And most importantly, how might he use the power once he has it?
George Soros' greatest strength comes in asking how the rules that people create can cause irrational behaviors that he can exploit to his advantage. Most famously, in 1992, he noted that England had a rule that a pound would be worth 2.7 Deutschmarks. Soros found a way to profit when he realized that he could just sell the pound, and he couldn't possibly lose. Now Soros has turned his attention to politics. It's an ambition as old as time. Marcus Licinius Crassus was the richest man in Rome, perhaps the richest man of all time, but wealth wasn't good enough for him. He craved power, too. Like Crassus before him, what George Soros finds is an arbitrage opportunity. See, Crassus, back in ancient Rome, they didn't have a firefighting force. What he'd do is he had a whole bunch of slaves that he trained to fight fires. And if there was a fire in a Roman building, he'd run up to the building and offer knockdown prices, 10 cents on the dollar to the owner of the building. I'll buy your house for you, or else it's going to burn down. And they'd have to take it. Well, what George Soros did, he's great at finding arbitrage opportunities. And what he's doing in America, he sees an opportunity to get power here by using the elections of prosecutors as an arbitrage opportunity. Here's what Elon Musk has to say about that.
He's very smart, and he's very good at arbitrage. Famously, he shorted the British pound. That's sort of how I think he made his first money, was shorting the pound. So he's good at spotting, basically arbitrage, like spotting value for money that other people don't see. So one of the things he noticed was that that the value for money in local races is much higher than it is in national races. So the lowest value for money is a presidential race. Then next lowest value for money is a Senate race, then a Congress, and but once you get to sort of city and state district attorneys, the value for money is extremely good.
I can walk up to anybody's house. I can knock on the door. And when it goes to a national level politician, I don't care, Trump, Biden, Clinton, Obama, don't matter. Everybody's got an opinion one way or the other. What is Musk really saying here? He says, we all got opinions on the big stuff, but nobody sees what's going on underneath. Nobody sees what's going on with the prosecutors and the DAs. Nobody sees what's going on with the local races. So now he's found his in.
Right. Do you even know the name of the 13th Judicial Circuit State Attorney?
No.
I actually had to Google it myself, and it's Susan Lopez.
Well, good job, Susan Lopez, on making it there.
Right, but you probably don't have an opinion on her, and your opinion on her could be swayed by hearing the right ad, couldn't it?
100%. I have no idea who Susan Lopez is. I never even heard her name until you just sprung it on me right now.
So by investing in these local elections, he can definitely get good value for money. But the question then becomes, why is he selecting prosecutors to be the people he's backing?
Soros realized that you don't actually need to change the laws. You just need to change how they're enforced. If nobody chooses to enforce the law, or the laws are differentially enforced, it's like changing the laws. That's what he figured out.
We've been debating criminal justice in this country for decades. And the place that the debate goes to, and it goes to the same place every time, should we be more or less severe on criminals? Should we punish them more or punish them less? And that is one of the least productive questions we could be asking.
if that's the least productive question that you're asking, right? More or less with that, then really, what is the question we should be asking?
Well, Richard Pryor, the comedian, used to have this routine. Richard Pryor did a movie called Stir Crazy, in which he went to a prison with Gene Wilder. And when he was in prison, he did a comedy routine about having interviewed people in the prison. And coming into the prison, he's saying, "Oh, we got to get all these my beautiful black brothers out of prison." And then he spoke to a couple people and says, "Why'd you kill the whole family?" He says, "Well, because they were home." So it's obvious that that guy who killed an entire family should be in prison. And maybe other people who are in prison shouldn't be in prison, wrongfully convicted people, for example. But it's not obvious that simply reducing the number of people in prison is going to make our society more just. We have a sorting task.
In my opinion, he fundamentally hates humanity. That's my opinion.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, well, he's doing things that erode the fabric of civilization. Getting DAs elected who refuse to prosecute crime. That's part of the problem in San Francisco and LA and a bunch of other cities. So why would you do that?
And how should we live? It's an extremely difficult question to answer. And coming up with laws that work is just so difficult. And the way it worked in Britain, and one of the reasons that the British common law is so successful, is that they took literally 1,000 years to come up with the actual answers. For example, in contracts and criminal law and torts and property and all these other areas of law, judges came up one case at a time and made the people's law. And it developed organically over 1,000 years' time. And recently in American history, what happened is we have started abandoning the common law. When America started, we kept the common law, but in the last 100 or so years, we've gotten rid of it and replaced it with statutes. Now legislatures make our laws. And in the criminal law, they have made the criminal law very user-friendly. And who's the user of the criminal law? The user of the criminal law is the prosecutor.
You're scaring the shit out of me. I'm not going to lie to you, brother. Like, we're talking about a man who has found the weaknesses in multiple societies, right? That's what he's done. He's exploited these weaknesses. Now he's doing that to America. And here's the crazy thing, is that no one's stopping him. No one's being like, "Hey, buddy, let's put the brakes on here." No, we're letting him do this. And we're not doing anything because he's found our weaknesses.
That people haven't pulled the brakes on this and have it reverse course?
Are we pulling the brakes?
Yeah.
Yeah, pulling the brakes right now.
Yeah, you are. But you might be the only one.
Well, I think more people should. Most people just don't want to rock the boat.
So the fact is, we have our criminal law written by legislators.
Wait, hold on. I'm a little confused there, blah. Legislators. So so that's basically where stuff like the Miranda rights come in. We've all seen cop movies where it's like guys says you have the right to remain silent.
Okay, no, that's not really how it worked out. In the 1960s, Earl Warren was the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, and he and the court completely revolutionized the way criminal justice is done and the way policing is done. Everything from getting stopped, getting searched, getting questioned, all of that came under the judge's scrutiny. The judges had to look at everything, and all became very, very rule-bound. And it was supposed to make things more fair, but instead of making things more fair, what it did was it made lawyers much more important. Because if you can get your confession thrown out because it wasn't taken properly, you need a lawyer who knows the rules cold. You see? And when lawyers got involved, and more lawyers did what they always started to do. They began to negotiate. And nowadays, instead of people taking their criminal case to trial, where they would, the Constitution, it guarantees you a fair trial in front of a jury of your peers. But now, if you're going to take a plea, the fact that you have the right to confront the witnesses against you, the fact that you have the right to an impartial jury of your peers, the fact that you have the right to a speedy trial, none of it matters anymore because you didn't take the case to trial.
Wait. Hold on, Ari. I got to jump in here for a second. So so why would I want to and really, I'm just going to ask, what does this have to do with like Soros? Because not really following there, because what I'm seeing here is I'm seeing like something really scary for the criminal justice system, because now, like, you're right. If you have a lawyer, you have money, basically, your lawyer can find how to get everything thrown out. But if you don't, you're screwed. That's why you got to take a plea.
But even if you have a lawyer, and even if you have a great lawyer, you still might lose, partly because of the tactics that prosecutors can use to get you to take a plea, and partly because of what will happen in trial because of the ways the laws have changed. The criminal laws in our country, now that they're written by legislatures, there are very many laws, and they're very specific in their character. So there's no rule that says one criminal act has to be charged with one charge. Instead, a prosecutor can make as many charges as he wants that covers the act that happened. So you could do one thing and get 20 charges. And each of those charges might give you, let's say, 5 years in jail. So if you're serving those sentences, if you get convicted and you're serving those sentences consecutively, you're risking 100 years in jail or something like that. So if the prosecutor says to you, listen, if you take a plea right now, you'll only serve one of them, you get 5 years in jail, you're risking 100. All of a sudden, it becomes in your interest to take that plea. There are other things, too. For example, there's what's called mandatory minimum sentences. I remember I had a client once, and he was charged with a crime that carried a minimum mandatory of life. If he went to trial and he was found guilty, the judge had no discretion whatsoever.
Wait, pause on that. Why doesn't the judge should have discretion? Why is it that we've taken the
problem they're trying to address is judges being entirely too lenient to some really, really bad people. And that's a serious problem. But the solution they came up with was minimum mandatory sentences. If you do this crime, the least amount of time you can serve in prison is, say, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, life.
Right. But in New York, we had the Rockefeller laws. If the guy was caught on a drug thing 3 times, he spent at least 30 years in prison, right? But that included like somebody who simply went to pick up like an eighth of an ounce for, he's like, oh, I'm gonna smoke some weed. Now he does that 3 times, he gets busted 3 times. On that, he can go to jail for 30 years. That doesn't make sense.
Well, the question of how strong the case is against you is a very important question. But if you're risking life in prison, then even if the state's case isn't that strong, you might take a plea anyway. Why might you take a plea? Because if you lose, and anything can happen at trial, if you lose, you're going away for life.
Right. But I mean, listen, if you go to trial, listen, if I'm a jurist on a trial, let's take it on the personal level.
Okay.
If I'm a jurist on a trial, the first thing I'm going to think of, I'm going to walk in there, right? I'm going to be fair and impartial. No, that's not what I'm thinking. If it's gotten to this point, because I now know off of all these cop shows and all these lawyer shows that we watch, of all the time I spent with you as a lawyer, other people I know who are in the legal profession, like my in-laws, I've got enough of an understanding that if you're getting to a trial, there must be a ton of evidence saying that you're guilty. That's how I think as a jurist. I could be wrong, but that's really what I think.
As a criminal attorney, if you're sitting next to your client at the defendant's table, you're already standing in a hole. So there's already that risk that they're going to take one look at your client and they're going to think, he's got to be here for a reason. And another thing that the legislatures have done to make it easier to get a plea is what's called the intent. See, it used to be when we were governed under the common law, you used to have what's called a mens rea, a vicious mindset when you're committing a crime. For example, if you're going to commit a robbery, I'm going to go over to him, I'm going to force him to give me his stuff. That's obviously a criminal. I'm going to burn down his house, I am going to kill him, I am going to kidnap him. Okay? All those things, I intend to do something awful to somebody else.
So wait, so what happens when there was an accidental death? Like today we have manslaughter.
Okay, that's a different kind of mindset where it's clearly reckless. I knew that if I went out and got smashed and drove my car at 100 miles an hour, I might kill somebody.
Okay,
So I'm so indifferent to other people's lives that is criminal in nature. It's also a form of intent, but not quite the same form of intent you would have for a murder. But even still, you don't have that intent requirement anymore because we now have something called general intent. What's general intent? General intent means that I intended to do the thing that was prohibited by the statute. There was a case in the 1950s. That's the way the old rule was. A guy was picking up bomb casings from federal property. And it was considered theft, but the case got all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court reversed the conviction because the U.S. government didn't prove that he intended to deprive somebody of their lawful property. They didn't prove that. Sorry, no more conviction. Nowadays, there was a case. It was 1994. And tell me if this sounds familiar, because there's a recent case that is just like this. In 1994, there's a case called Stark versus the People, or People versus Stark. And it involved the guy repaying loans out of various accounts. And everybody got paid off, and there were no victims of this crime, but he paid from the wrong accounts. And since he intended to do the thing that the statute says you can't do, that's all it takes. All it takes to convict him. And the California Supreme Court said, yep, kosher conviction.
I mean, this is confusing to me because now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking like the recent things against Donald Trump. And I'm just like, wait a second, is this what's going on with him?
It's really similar. I mean, in the Donald Trump case, they're saying that he inflated the value of Mar-a-Lago and did a few other things in order to get a bank loan, which he repaid, and then the bank continued to want to do business with him. But since he did the thing that the statute prohibits, that's considered fraud. You don't need to have a false statement of fact. You can have a false guess as to the value of property. You don't need to have an actual victim because the bank was completely satisfied with how the transaction went. You don't need any of those things. All you have to do is do something that's prohibited by the statute.
Right. So really what we're saying is that somebody out there hates Trump enough that we're just going to delve into everything so we can just like bash the man and hopefully get him out of the presidential election. That's really what I'm seeing. And you know what's very interesting? You know who's on record as saying as she hates Donald Trump and will do everything in her power to go after him?
Who's that?
The New York State District Attorney.
When you have criminal laws that are written by judges, the kind of laws you tend to get are the things that prohibit and criminalize stuff that everybody would consider a crime, right? What kind of acts would you consider crimes?
What would I consider crimes? Robbery, rape, murder,
arson,
theft, arson. Arson's a good one, like things where it's like, so basically like this. It's where somebody gets hurt by somebody else's intention, right? Like I can see that you want my money. So you put a gun up to me and say, give me your money or your life. That's a crime.
But okay. So you've named robbery, murder, that kind of thing. How many of these things can you really name, though?
I wouldn't know. I could probably come up with a bunch more. I wouldn't doubt that, from breaking and entering to destruction of property to other stuff like that.
Be fair to say you can only come up with a couple of dozen?
Oh, that's for sure. I could probably. I'm not a criminal, so I wouldn't know.
Okay, because the number of, say in the U.S. code, so nobody really knows the number of crimes there actually are, but they are numbered in like 5, something like 4, 5, 6,000, something like that. And you can't name that many distinct events that are actually crimes, things that hurt people.
Yeah, that is true. I would have a limit on that.
Right, but what happens is they criminalize things like getting rid of tangible evidence of a crime. There's a case recently that made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court where somebody was being stopped by the Coast Guard for illegal fishing, and he got rid of a few undersized fish. And there was a law that was written after the Enron case about getting rid of tangible evidence of a crime. And he got rid of a couple of undersized fish, and they charged him with getting rid of tangible evidence of a crime. Getting rid of this tangible evidence was a crime that carried, I think it was either 10 or 20 years in prison. And when it got to the Supreme Court, Justice Scalia asked the attorney representing the United States, what kind of mad prosecutor would put you in jail for 20 years for getting rid of a fish? And there's no good answer to that question. But when it comes to the very specific laws that are written by legislatures, that's the kind of law you can get. When you have a common law that's written for the people and by the people over 1,000 years' time, using that much experience and that much wisdom, you don't get laws where if somebody gets rid of a fish, they're going to spend most of the rest of their life in prison.
The more you talk, the more I'm seeing how Soros has exposed like many different places where we have weakness. Anybody who's ever read The Prince by Machiavelli or The Art of War by Sun Tzu, like we all know that exploit weakness, exploit the weakness, exploit the weakness, exploit the weakness. Over and over again. That's what they both say, right? Well, George Soros has showed us our weaknesses, and we're not. We're letting him exploit it.
And it's just like with COVID. All of a sudden, after COVID, we see that a lot of the institutions we trusted aren't as trustworthy as we thought they were. And now we're starting to see the weaknesses in America's criminal justice system. And it's not that the sentences are too harsh or too lenient or whatever. That's not the main problem. That might be a symptom of the problem, but it's not the main problem.
So let me ask you a constitutional point. You're saying in the Constitution, it says we have a right to a fair and impartial, a speedy trial by a fair and impartial jury. Am I correct on reading that right?
That's exactly correct.
Okay, so now we're talking about here is that it was naturally put into the Constitution that there were going to be gaps into the system, but we understood the gaps based on the common law. We understood that. Now I'm seeing that we've taken out the common law and to go back to the idea of where we're at. You know, I get a trial with a jury of my peers, people who are fair and impartial. That's what I'm said to in the Constitution. Now it's everything's plea bargain, plea bargain, plea bargain. Does that somehow like correlate? Am I missing something? Isn't that all part of the trial system? Like,
okay. What you're missing is this. The Constitution has very little to say about what kind of laws the legislatures can make. When it comes to the criminal law, all the Constitution really talks about is the procedure. How can I be tried? What kind of punishments I can get? Do I get an attorney? These are the kinds of things that govern criminal law as per the Constitution. And it never bothered to consider what kind of laws would be criminal. And that's why you get these insane laws like people being putting on trial almost for their life for throwing out a fish. What we really need to do is to have a criminal law that reflects what really is bad and criminal behavior instead of what some legislature can come up with and then what some politician who's determined to get as many convictions as he can and to convict all the right people would want.
It's like we've lost the plot here. To go back to Soros, right? What are we saying? We've now lost the plot because of this manipulation of the law. So now, what are we doing? We're worried about some guy dropping a fish off of his boat and giving him 20 years in prison. You hear what I'm saying here?
It's not just that, because remember, there are thousands of these laws, thousands of them, and no one could count them.
But see, what are these legislatures make these laws just so they can appear busy? Is that what they're doing?
Well, after Enron, there was a significant problem with people getting rid of tangible evidence of their wrongdoing. So they were correcting a genuine problem, you see? But once they made that rule was out there, and it was enterprising prosecutors were able to use that rule to the disadvantage of the people.
Right. Now, see, what you're explaining to me is you give somebody an inch, they'll take a mile.
Exactly.
And, that's exactly what you're explaining to me, right? But I'm going to take this a step further. Now I'm a prosecutor. I've got all these thousands of laws that nobody's ever read before. So I could trump up some shit on anybody if I want to. I can now take them and I can hurt them. And it doesn't even matter at some point if I get that conviction, because my job is no longer just to take out my political opponents by doing something politically. Now I'm doing something within the law, and the law is now written in such a way where if I'm a prosecutor, I can now manipulate it. Like, remember the old silly putty? We used that little clay thing we used to play with, rolling in the bowl, it bounce, and you put it on a comic book, and you press down, and what happens? The comic's now on your silly putty, right? But it's not it's not the same comic. It's the reflection of it. And now, what am I seeing? Prosecutors are doing that to the laws, that we're now playing around and moving things and doing things however we want to manipulate them to take out a guy like Trump.
The question then becomes, how could somebody as clever as George Soros use the power of prosecution to get the kind of power he wants? And that's a question we're going to explore in our next episode.